Mythic dungeons are the peak of dungeon content in World of Warcraft. This is where players show off the hard work they've put in to master their class and get incredible loot. However, don't let that intimidate you, as the Mythic system is easy to learn, yet hard to master. My name is Swag, your guide to the World of Warcraft, and today I'm here to help you get started in Mythic dungeons. You'll learn everything you need to know about finding groups, keystones, affixes, timers, and more. Of course, if this is your first time here on my channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with more WoW guides and news. For my viewers who are already familiar with Mythic dungeons, can you take a second and comment below what advice you would want to give somebody who is about to begin Mythic dungeons? So, what makes Mythic dungeons so mythic? Well, if you're completely new to dungeons altogether, you can check out another video on my channel called The Beginner's Guide to Dungeons. And in that video, we established that there are 3 types of dungeons: normal, heroic, and mythic. But really, that oversimplification is a bit misleading, as Mythic dungeons will infinitely scale in difficulty until players can no longer accomplish them. This is where you will hear terms like +2, +3, and even +23. These scaled up dungeons are often referred to as Mythic Plus or Mythic Keys. Each one of those numbers indicates how scaled up that dungeon is. The higher the number, the higher the difficulty. A standard Mythic dungeon, often referred to as a Mythic 0 or an M0, is just like normal and heroic dungeons, except more difficult. Once you complete a Mythic dungeon, you will receive a keystone item in your bag. Every time you complete a Mythic dungeon, you will get another one of these keystones, and they are used to unlock more difficult versions of the Mythic dungeons. So theoretically, if you were to receive a keystone for Brackenhide Hollow at a +2 difficulty, you could unlock that difficulty level in Brackenhide Hollow. Then, upon completing the run, you will receive a different keystone at a higher level for another dungeon. You cannot have multiple keystones at once, so once you've completed a dungeon, you will lose that keystone and receive another. It's worth noting at this point that going from a standard Mythic dungeon into any Mythic Plus dungeon will cause radical changes to how that dungeon operates. As mentioned before, Mythic Plus dungeons will scale in difficulty, which means enemies have more health and deal more damage. On top of that, every Mythic Plus dungeon has a timer. Your team will be racing against the clock to beat the timer and complete that dungeon. If they do so, they will be rewarded with a keystone at a higher level for another dungeon. If you fail the dungeon, your keystone will be lowered by 1. However, if you complete it within the time, it will go up by 1. If you complete it within extra time, it'll go up by 2. And even more time on top of that, it will go up by 3. Doing so is often referred to as +2ing or 2-chesting, also +3ing or 3-chesting. Along with the timer, you will also need to kill a required amount of enemies. Now, you don't have to kill them all, just enough that the percent bar reaches 100. Bosses do not count on the meter, however, they are required in order to complete the dungeon. This will require groups to be creative and efficient, completing the meter at 100% without wasting time or pulling more enemies than they need to. The last major change for Mythic Plus dungeons is the introduction of affixes. Affixes add additional dangers into the dungeon for your group to face. These affixes change every week, and more are added to the dungeon at higher key levels. The first set of affixes start right away on +2 keys. There are only 2 possible options, and they rotate back and forth every week. These are called tyrannical and fortified. The tyrannical affix causes bosses to have more health and deal more damage, while the fortified affix causes non-boss enemies to have more health and deal more damage. As you can see, this will change how you approach the dungeon, which talents you want to take, whether you're single target focusing or multi-target focusing. For this current season, patch 10.1, another affix is added to your dungeons on +7s and higher, and then again the final set of affixes are added on +14 and higher keys. Affixes do change season to season, and even the levels at which they start change season to season. So to keep things simple, I'm going to link down below a website I like to use called Mythic Plus, which gives me all the information I need each week on what affixes I'm facing and how to handle them. Because affixes can get pretty wild. Some affixes will root you in place, others will place volcanoes beneath your feet, or summon tornadoes to whoosh you away. It's best to know which affixes you're going to face and how to face them before you head into the dungeon. And speaking of which, Mythic Plus dungeons do require a bit of knowledge before you head in. you're racing against a clock, and so you don't have time to just stop and ask questions or try things over and over again until you figure out what works. One of the best things you can do before entering a dungeon is to open up your adventure guide. You can find a little menu for it in the bottom right corner of your screen. Open it up and read the mechanics for that dungeon on the boss fights. That will give you a great starting point. Of course, it won't have everything, so as you're doing the dungeons, make sure to take as many notes as you possibly can, because what won't kill you now will kill you later. While I was putting together the script for this video, I did a little bit of crowdsourcing on my Discord. You can find a link down below in the description if you'd like to join. However, I was asking them what tips they would give to a first-time Mythic Plus runner. And I was actually kind of caught off guard by one of them. And it was great. It's a good tip. I just hadn't thought of it myself. Not only do you need to learn the dungeons before you enter them, you also need to learn your class. Because in normal and heroic dungeons, a lot of your utility spells aren't needed. And to be honest, I've met a lot of players that don't even have all their spells out on their bards. And all of a sudden, they find themselves digging through their spell book because they need a spell in the middle of a Mythic Plus dungeon and they don't have it on their bar. You don't want to be caught in that situation. So you're feeling ready. You've set up your spell bar, fixed your talents, and even read up on the boss fights. But where do you find a group? Normally, you would just open up the group finder, queue up, and you're good to go. But there's no Mythic option for dungeons. Instead, on the left-hand side of the group finder window, select pre-made groups. Then select dungeons. At this point, you need to decide if you want to use your keystone or if you want to join someone else's group to use theirs. If you want to do someone else's key, just select find a group and search for the criteria you are looking for. If you're looking to do a regular Mythic, try searching for M0. Once you find a group, hit apply and wait to see if you get invited to the group. These are player-led groups, so an invite is not guaranteed. If you would like to run your own group instead, you can click Start a Group. By default, it will input your keystone information, but you can adjust that to be something else if needed. However, listing the group is the easy part. It's picking your team that gets tricky. You'll see players start populating your signup, and as that happens, you can begin inviting them to your group. A few key things to think about, however: make sure your group has the proper build of a tank, a healer, and 3 DPS. On top of that, you'll want to have a good balance between ranged and melee DPS to help handle mechanics. Speaking of mechanics, make sure you do a little research on which classes handle different dungeons, affixes, or mechanics well, so that you can make sure to invite those classes to the dungeons that they would be best suited in. And lastly, take a look at everyone's eye level and mythic score. Their eye level can be found here and will show you the average quality of their gear. Their mythic score can be found right here. This will show you how successful they've been in mythic dungeons. By the way, you can check your own mythic rating in the LFG window by clicking this tab right here. Your mythic rating is a combination of your best completions for each dungeon, and it counts fortified and tyrannical affix weeks separately. So you've got your team and you're ready to go. But where are you going? Mythic dungeons require players to enter through the dungeon's entrance rather than teleporting all players into the dungeon automatically. However, it really only requires 2 players, as outside every dungeon is a stone like this called a summoning stone. 2 players can summon the rest of their team using this stone. Before you head into the dungeon though, make sure to right click your profile picture and change your dungeon difficulty to mythic. If you happen to enter before doing so, everybody needs to leave the dungeon, then you can switch and they may re-enter. If this is a mythic 0 dungeon, all you need to do is make sure you get your buffs up and you can start right away. However, if this is a mythic plus dungeon, it gets a bit more complicated. You see, you cannot change your talents once it starts, and you can't change your gear out either, so make sure you have the right gear on and the right talent selected. Use the command /ready check to make sure all players in your group are ready. If so, you can place the key in this key stand right here, and in doing so, you will begin the dungeon. Welcome to your first Mythic Dungeon experience. Comment below how it went, and of course, if you're looking for some friends to run dungeons with, here's a link down below to our in-game community where you can find other players that would love to run dungeons with you. My name is Swag, and thank you for letting me be your guide to the world of Warcraft.